The rain began before sunrise, cold, silver drops soaking the heavy black mourning banners that hung from the palace walls. The Crescent Fang pack gathered around the sacred burial grounds in absolute, heavy silence. No one spoke. No one dared to even breathe too loudly. Because inside the tiny white coffin at the center of it all lay the dead heir of the Alpha King. Only 3 days old, he had never cried, never opened his eyes, never even taken a single breath. The palace healers whispered of a dark curse, and the priests called it a cruel punishment from the moon goddess herself. And the terrifying Alpha King, Kalar, he was completely broken by it. For 3 agonizing, sleepless nights, he just sat in the shadows, holding his lifeless son, completely refusing to accept this grim fate. But even kings must yield. With a face entirely devoid of emotion, a dangerous, empty calm that terrified everyone who saw it, Kalar finally gave the chilling order. Bury him at dawn. He stood unmoving as the priests prayed, ignoring the violent storm raging around them. It was almost as if the very sky itself begged for mercy, expressing the anguish the Alpha King refused to show. The burial ended quickly. The pack was terrified of their alpha's suppressed grief, knowing the violent destruction it caused the last time he lost control. The powerful nobles, the warriors, the priests, they all fled the shrine. They abandoned the grave, leaving only one small figure standing alone in the torrential downpour. A fragile, gentle servant Omega named Aerin. Aerin stood shivering beneath the brutal storm. He was completely haunted by the memory of the tiny body he had secretly tended to in the dark corners of the nursery. He had cleaned the blood, he had prepared the soothing herbs. With a gentle, emotionally wounded voice, he looked at the harsh royal guard left behind and whispered, "Can I stay a little longer?" The guard scoffed, grabbing Aerin's arm roughly. "It's dead," he spat. But before Aerin could even process the cruelty of those words, an impossible sound froze the rain itself. A tiny cough. The guard stiffened. Aerin's breath hitched in his throat, his eyes slowly widening. Panic and pure disbelief began to set in. Then, another weak sound echoed through the downpour. It wasn't an animal calling from the dark forest. It wasn't a servant crying out from the grand palace. It was something entirely localized and deeply unnatural. It was coming from beneath the earth. Aerin dropped to his knees in the thick mud. He frantically, desperately began clawing at the heavy wet dirt, screaming for help over the deafening roar of the storm. His bare fingers tore into the soil, because underneath the mud, the baby was crying. The heir had been buried, but he was not dead. The terrified guard finally rushed forward, and together they dragged the small white coffin from the shallow grave. The moment the heavy lid was pulled open, a tiny pale hand reached upward. His skin was ice cold, his breathing was incredibly shallow, and his heartbeat was nothing more than a fragile flutter. But he was impossibly, miraculously, alive. Aerin didn't hesitate for a second. He immediately pulled the child against his chest, wrapping his own soaked body around the tiny heir to give him warmth. Instantly, the weak crying stopped. The child relaxed into his arms, letting out a soft sigh. It was as if the infant recognized his savior instantly, as if he had been searching for this specific Omega in the dark. But the quiet intimacy of that rescue was shattered as heavy footsteps thundered through the shrine. Warriors burst into the clearing, and then Kalar appeared. The Alpha King stopped cold in the mud. For the first time since his mate's death, his terrifying composure finally cracked. It shattered into raw disbelief and a deep, entirely unfamiliar fear at the sight of his breathing son. He crossed the clearing in seconds. His voice was a dark rumble of absolute command. "Give him to me." Aerin carefully obeyed, stepping back into his role as a mere servant. But the second Kalar's massive hands took the baby, sudden panic struck. The tiny heir instantly began choking. His weak body trembled violently, his fragile heartbeat fading away once again, dying right there in his powerful father's arms. Kalar's eyes widened in sheer horror. Instinctively, Aerin stepped forward. Kalar looked at the desperate servant, and in an incredibly rare moment of submission for an Alpha King, he slowly handed the baby back. The moment the child returned to Aerin's arms, the breathing resumed. The tiny, cold fingers peacefully curled into the servant's soaked robes, alive once more. Silence consumed the shrine. Even the rain seemed to quiet down. Kaelor stared at the Omega, his eyes narrowing with a cold, dangerous suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded. He was recalling the ancient myth of the rare moon-bond Omega, unique individuals inherently capable of calming and grounding the most violent, untamed royal bloodlines. The heavy pressure of Kaelor's aura filled the clearing, suffocating the guards with his raw power. Yet the fragile Omega remained incredibly still. Kaelor stared at his son, looking peaceful for the very first time, and delivered an absolute, life-altering command. "From this moment forward, this Omega does not leave the Heir's side." Those words froze the shrine, forever chaining Aerin to the dark, powerful royal family. That night, the storm worsened outside, lightning fracturing the sky and casting stark, violent shadows against the moonstone walls of the enormous royal nursery. Inside, bathed in the soft glow of the grand, gold-curtained room, Aerin sat trapped in a stunned, heavy silence, gently rocking the tiny Heir against his chest. The heavy wooden door opened silently. Kaelor entered. He had stripped away his ceremonial armor, now wearing only dark, loose clothing that hung from his broad frame. Without his armor, the Alpha King somehow looked even more untamed, more physically vulnerable, yet energetically, even more dangerous to the fragile Omega. The dark intimacy of the room wrapped around them as Kaelor's silver eyes fixed on the Omega. He noticed Aerin hadn't put the baby down in the cradle once since arriving. "You're afraid of me," Kaelor stated. It wasn't a question. He recognized the deep, trembling terror the servant held for him. Aerin kept his eyes lowered. His voice was heartbreakingly fragile, yet carrying a quiet resilience. "Powerful people usually hurt Omegas like me," he whispered. "The unwanted ones." Because of his low societal status, he genuinely expected cruelty from someone as powerful as Kaelor. In that moment, a subtle, magnetic shift vibrated in the air. The thick, silent tension between the two men was undeniable. Kaelor realized this Omega wasn't trying to manipulate him. He wasn't playing some political game. The raw, tragic honesty struck the Alpha King, binding them in an unspoken, electric undercurrent. And then, a soft gasp, the newborn Alpha stirred against Aerin's chest. Tiny eyelids fluttered. And slowly, for the very first time, the baby opened his eyes. They burned with the ancient, royal silver color of a true king, confirming the child's immense, latent power and undeniable lineage. Kaelor froze, waiting for his son's royal gaze to finally meet his own. But the child completely ignored his powerful father. Sleepily, but with undeniable purpose, the tiny hand reached up, seeking only the gentle warmth of the servant Omega. Kaelor stood rooted to the floor as a dark, inexplicable jealousy pierced straight through his chest. A possessive fire he had never known ignited within his blood. His powerful stare swept over the Omega, holding his child, silently claiming the room, the Heir, and the fragile servant himself as mine. The silence lingered heavily in the grand nursery. A dark, romantic mystery now binds these three souls together. The powerful, untouchable king, the resurrected Heir, and the fragile Omega who literally holds their lives in his delicate hands. A dangerous, beautiful fate had just been sealed. Wildmane uploads BL stories daily. Subscribe for more emotional BL stories and comment what type of story you want next.